treatment study. They went to Philip Owen, and they went over there in a big armored car, and they went in his office with guns, and they tried to intimidate him. They went to Ottawa and said, you want trucks lined up at the border for hours and days if you don't cooperate. And we stood our ground on some of these things. You know, I mean, we don't want to copy the American model. We don't look south and say, hey, that's what we want to do. You know? And I think that standing up to this kind of stuff, I mean, 95% of the funding that goes into drug research and studies and all this comes out of the American NIDA in the United States. Well, when we did that heroin-assisted treatment study just down the street, that was Canadian money. That was CIHR, Canadian Institute of Health Research, that paid for that because the Americans wouldn't. Because that's the kind of studies that they don't want to see for.
I know Monique will not have time to answer this question, but it was something that came up when you all go and watch the 4.5 hours of the Supreme Court case. You will hear a lot about this issue. So the question is, can you help us understand interjurisdictional immunity and paramountcy, and how, when, if one trumps the other with reference to Insite?
Monique's the pro.
In a couple of minutes.
Canadian federalism in 45 seconds. So in Canada, we've got a division of powers between the federal government and the provincial government. Each set of powers is exclusive. In the law of Canadian federalism, there are several important doctrines that help you decide what to do when there is a conflict or a clash between the different levels of government. And over the span of, I guess, the last 130 years or so, two doctrines have had high points and low points. And the one that's had the most high points is paramountcy. It's the easiest one to understand. The idea is that when you've got a federal law and a provincial law that are in conflict with each other in one of two ways, either because one law, for example, says yes and the other one says no, or because the purpose of the provincial law undermines the purpose of the federal law, then under the rule of paramountcy, the federal law wins. So that's basically how paramountcy works. Interjurisdictional immunity, I wish they had a shorter tag for it, but essentially what that says is because each head of power, the federal powers and the provincial powers, are exclusive, the idea is that there's a core to each of those powers. And the one level of government should not be able to invade the core of the other level of government's powers. And so the argument that we made in this case is that the provincial power to deliver health care is in part defined by choice over treatment or providing for treatment and for making decisions about cost and efficiency within the healthcare system. And so because the court in the past has defined the power in that way, the argument goes, we think this is at its core. And so we argued that the doctrine of interjurisdictional immunity should apply to protect the core of the provincial power over the delivery of health care from invasion by the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, where the nature of that invasion was so serious that it would essentially melt the core. So if the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act applies to Insite, it will undermine its very purpose. And that goes so deep into provincial powers that the argument goes Canadian federalism shouldn't accept it. So a few more than 45 seconds, but that's about it.
You've been practicing for several years now. This is a very unfair question, but it's a question that lurks in the weeds in any of these public forums. And we have about 5 minutes left. I have a few too many questions, but what would you like to see happen so that people don't have to turn to drugs in the first place? How can we help stop addiction?
Well, maybe we should
It's a tough question.
read Bruce Alexander about dislocation, and you're going to see that we're going to have a lot more problems with addiction rather than not a lot. And I think it has a lot to do with, as we move forward in this ever-changing and ever-speedy and fast world, that we lose connections to our family, to our roots, to our cultures, and just the whole way the earth runs now. And I think we've got to sort of claw that back and take a little bit more ownership ourselves. But to prevent people from using drugs, my God, you know, like, how are we going to prevent people from drinking? How are we going to prevent, you know, it's not a personal choice, but it's a tough. How are we going, you know, what the question should be, how are we going to prevent people from being so entwined with drug use that there's negative behaviors? And I think we've got to look at that. I think people are going to use drugs, alcohol, tobacco, them all, but how do we actually become effective in preventing people from having negative outcomes when dealing with drugs or any other addiction? And I think that's what we really got to focus on in the future, because there's going to be a lot more of us out there.
Or how do we make people's lives matter to themselves enough without the drugs being more important? And that speaks to the whole foundation of having a caring society. So national daycare programs, social housing programs,
I did see one additional thing in addition to Liz's comments about building a social infrastructure that's more supportive of people. Our experience at the Dr. Peters Center it demonstrates that there's a lot of, and we all know this, undiagnosed mental illness and undiagnosed depression and untreated pain. And it's interesting when you bring people into care, there's actually prescribed medication that will support individuals in those situations. And so their need to resort to illegal drugs actually reduces. So that's just one small thing that can be done if individuals have enough access to proper medical care.
Last question before we wrap up. If Insite wins, does this open the door for Vancouver Coastal Health to explore heroin prescription or cocaine substitution treatment?
I think that's the bottom line that we can look forward. You know, dead people don't detox, so we've got to come up with a different plan.
If I'm going to speak to that, I would say hopefully, but I think that we got to get through this heroin-assisted treatment as a program. We got to get to that point. I think that the research that was done right here in Vancouver with Naomi is very valid throughout the world. There's been heroin-assisted treatment studies done in Spain and Germany and the Netherlands and Britain and many countries in the world, Switzerland, and they've all shown that heroin-assisted treatment as a program would work for certain people. Right now, in British Columbia, all we offer people when they're coming off, when they tell you they don't want to do heroin anymore, we offer them methadone, one drug. There's no choices involved. It's methadone or abstinence, and a lot of people aren't ready for the abstinence part. I think that we have to get past studies, and we have to start looking at the evidence, and the evidence shows that the heroin-assisted treatment works. I'm going to give you the example of Denmark right now. In Denmark, since last February, there's in 6 cities in Denmark, there's heroin-assisted treatment programs where people go through every day to get their heroin injection. And the evidence that they relied on, why it's not a study there, and they didn't do a study in Denmark. They relied on the evidence that came right from here from Vancouver. You know, where people that were in that program, all their health indicators went up, everybody gained weight. You know, I mean, all the underlying issues were changed. I mean, the study was a success, and here we're going to be doing another study here in Vancouver. It's called Salome, which should start quite soon. This time it'll be 322 people from this downtown Insite community that will be in this program. And I think that we got to get past the study part and start putting these things into programs, because that's what they're doing around the world. I think we have to look around the world and see what some of the things that are working. And they looked to us, and they said, wow, that was really cool what you guys did right here at Abbott and Hastings. And I think that heroin-assisted treatment is something that we have to really consider as a program.
I'll just add to what Dave said there. I think it is really important to move beyond the studies and beyond the pilot situation, and I think that's one of the very unfortunate effects of the political climate surrounding these types of interventions. So if we're finding that they're effective and they're meeting objectives, not causing harm, they should be scaled up, and that's really one of the things that may result from the court case.
It's been my understanding that human beings have always used substances to alter perception for all kinds of reasons. So the outcome of those substances and the effects on the human beings and on the communities in which they live and use these substances is a structural one that needs to be changed. And if there are problems, which we certainly created a lot of problems, or the problems have been created for vested interests and other reasons. So I don't know that we would ever, I mean, it's a matter of eliminating use so much as changing